Told people said like, man, why you think history is so important? And I said, if you lost in the forest, the first thing you do is retrace your footsteps. Right? So once I retraced my footsteps, I learned which direction, north, east, west, south. Right? Now, if you, as a man, right, it is required for you to leave a trail now for anybody else to be able to follow. Right? So when I retraced our footsteps, and I was in prison, so I had to say, how did I get here? You know, and not just that first action, that last action that was the charge, but how did the condition created that got that to that point? Because we don't understand that we have shaped communities. This is the problem. If you don't understand your history and you don't know about resurrection, the Reconstruction period, if you don't.
This area was originally a federal encampment where emancipated slaves came. They flocked here.
They're liberating themselves. They're liberating themselves with their feet. They know Union troops are nearby. They know slavery never worked for them. So they're going to these places where they can begin to make sense out of life and to begin to live life as freed people.
Don't know about the communities we built, right? And you just looking at your current condition. I was taught you was enslaved, and then you look at your current condition. You see? So now everything is ours. I'm blaming everything is ours. It's everybody else's responsibility because I don't know my own capabilities.
Little shanty town, and it consisted of tents and shacks, and this is where they put the former slaves.
Blissville basically became the core for the early Black commercial district. It was established really just west of where Mount Holly Cemetery is, right in close proximity to 9th Street. Something new was happening in Arkansas in terms of just societal change.
So my thing is understand our own capabilities, take accountability for our aspect, what we contribute to racism towards ourselves.
A lot of things that are necessary to grow an economy and grow a community were not really available to Black people at that time, just post-Reconstruction. And the way that it was provided was the formation of fraternal organizations.
So, based upon that, could you go a little further and explain to the people listening exactly why is it important that we as a people learn the importance of learning how to go back to being a community of one? Because you alluded to that there was times where we did that. So can you expound upon that a little bit more? Give us some examples of different communities that actually showcased and thrived.
Well, we had
the 1870s and 1880s, businesses were being established, especially from Broadway, which was kind of anchored the east end of the West 9th Street business district, all the way down to Ringo Street. And in that kind of 6-block area, majority were operated by African Americans. New kind of type of African American living here, a Black urban middle class.
You know, you're talking about people who understand very well that they have to be self-sufficient, that they have to be self-contained. We're also talking about people who are very intelligent. They understand well the times in which they live and the things that they need to do in order to survive. And also, when we're talking about people who may have been formerly enslaved, that doesn't mean everybody was in the field picking cotton. Some of these people had skills.
Slave trading produced an allegory institution called slave renting or slave hiring. Some whites developed a need for short-term slave labor but did not wish to own slaves. Other whites who could not afford to own slaves did the next best thing. They rented slaves. Owners generally profited from this practice, and renters had the labor of unskilled or skilled slaves without the cost of permanent ownership. Most were skilled slaves, including tailors, barbers, cooks, carpenters, and blacksmiths. The city newspapers printed notices offering the services of skilled slaves for hire by the month or the year. The practice of slave hiring in Charleston became so complex that many slaves wore a badge around their neck with a number indicating their particular skills or craft. The Charleston City Council taxed these badges.
And so what's happening on 9th Street is happening in Black communities all over the country. They're forming mutual aid kinds of societies to help each other out in difficult times.
You have North Carolina, right, where during the time of slavery, slave hiring was prevalent. So when slavery ended, Blacks had a lot of skills.
Wilmington, prior to November 1898, was what the New South could be at the cusp of the 20th century.
There was an unusual degree of Black prosperity.
In Wilmington, there were successful Black entrepreneurs, doctors, teachers, but also Black elected officials.
During this time, Wilmington's Black businesses grew at a faster pace than any other North Carolina city. In 1897, over 1,000 African Americans owned some sort of property in Wilmington. The city's African American population was enriched by schools, wealth, and inherited status.
And you also had the brother that created the peanut, George Carver. He also, when he learned planning, he also created schools, mobile schools, and went mobily to Black communities and educated them on how to farm. So from 65 to 75, within 10 years, half of North Carolina Black population owned land.
Wow.
So, and then you have to think Seneca Village in New York, 50-60% home ownership. We talking 1800s. No other group of people had a high home ownership in America. And I believe this is because immediately after slavery, we knew to separate from them and their system. Because,
well, of course, poor whites were devastated by the war like anyone else. Much of their land had been marched over and destroyed, tools, crops, animals, bridges, many were thrown into poverty by the war. There's a high death rate, of course.
I don't like the culture vultures DJ Khaled, but in my DJ Khaled voice, and another city.
The city of Rosewood was known for being a clean, quiet, self-sufficient Black neighborhood. The economy was mainly drawn from the timber industry, as cedar wood was used to make pencils, which helped the economy thrive. By the year 1920, the residents of Rosewood were mostly self-sufficient. They had 3 churches, a school, a large Masonic hall, a turpentine mill, a sugarcane mill, a baseball team named the Rosewood Stars, and 2 general stores. The village had about a dozen 2-story wooden plank homes, other small 2-room houses, and several small unoccupied plank farm and storage structures. Some families owned pianos, organs, and other symbols of middle-class prosperity. Rosewood is remembered by the survivors as an independent, thriving, happy.
And another one.
3 lots for $125. Epiphany Davis, a store clerk, bought 12 lots for $578. And the AME Zion Church purchased another 6 lots. From there, a community was born. From its modest beginnings, the village had grown over 3 decades to include as many as 300 residents, numerous homes and gardens, 3 churches, 2 schools, and 3 cemeteries. 70% of the residents were African American, and 30% were Irish American. Over half of residents own their own homes.
Community called Slocum in Texas. Slocum, Texas was part of the East Texas oil field, which remains one of the largest ever in the continental United States, encompassing 5 counties. Unlike most Texas communities in the early 20th century, the unincorporated town of Slocum, like Rosewood, Florida, was largely African American, with several black citizens having owned considerable amount of property.
Oklahoma had 45 black towns and municipalities. It was capital of black self-determination. I liken it to a city within a city. Greenwood itself is an area of nearly 40 square blocks, with individual neighborhoods, individual churches that have their own parishes.
About 40 to 45 blocks of a residential community with a business district.
Many African American communities in the United States were thriving in the 1910s and 20s. But the high level of home ownership in Greenwood made Tulsa's Black District distinctive.
Now, for some white people, a black person with any wealth, then as well as today, is something that created jealousy.
Because of this situation in the South in the post-war period.
Burdened by debt and overcome by their resentment of landowners' power, poor whites became angrier and angrier. Their frustration fueled intense racism as they sought to elevate their own lowly status by degrading their black peers.
Whites was never in the same predicament as us. Black was always far worse off. The difference is that whites fail to understand that their oppressors has always been the elite Anglo-Saxon whites. Blacks coming out of slavery turned inwards towards themselves because they knew that they could not count on these any Europeans for justice. So they formed organizations, they shared skills, resources in order to help build various black communities. This is why blacks need a self-imposed segregation now. Because integration has not worked. It has harmed the mind state of us as a people. It has harmed the mind state of our youth. It has disrupted our family values, completely destroyed the concept of black family. We need a self-imposed segregation because blacks do well self-impose. All European nations crumble because of inequality. From Greek to the Romans, every European economy has always suffered from mass inequality.
The State Democratic Party handbook for 1898 laid out